Happy Friday and welcome to The Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I'm Travis Fain, one of WRAL's state government reporters.
And it's been a week. Started off with the State of the State address by Governor Cooper on Monday night. As you noted, quite scripted.
Yeah.
Which it normally is. I mean,
right. But there was one paragraph where, he said, "Yep," and if you look in the text, the script, it says "yep." I mean, it's like it's like, be folksy here, Governor. Yeah. Be folksy.
Well, I thought it went okay, but I think, as you also pointed out, it didn't really. I mean, it kind of set a vision of, we're at a transitional time. We need to prepare for the future. They made these kind of changes in the past, like when they did RTP, et cetera. We need to have the same kind of transition coming out of this pandemic and recession. And well, it wasn't a recession, but okay.
And take the federal money we got from the pandemic and use it wisely.
Yeah.
Set ourselves up to be the clean energy economy state for the next 30 years. I mean, the vision was there. It wasn't a very punchy speech. I don't know. I perhaps I was expecting more for the governor's final State of the State speech, but whatever.
I felt like he did get to some things. He told them to stay away from the culture war bills.
Right.
Brought up HB 2.
Right.
Which never fails to induce some cringes. Lots of mad applause from Democrats, not very much mad applause from Republicans. That's exactly what you'd think. But we did hear in both his address, and then Lieutenant Governor Robinson's response, both of them talked about the importance of expanding broadband. So at least we know there's one topic on which, and Medicaid, and then Medicaid as well. So we know, there's a couple things on which both parties are united.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the last 10 years or so, where we are now, the bipartisan agreements on things are really, it's impressive. I mean, you can argue maybe it shouldn't take 13 years to get to the same place on Medicaid expansion, but we are at that place. Now, what Republicans make the Democrats swallow in the state budget in order to get Medicaid expansion,
that's another question.
We shall see, because there will be things there. But, compared to previous years, they're working together a good bit.
Yeah, and I should mention childcare. That's another area where just yesterday we saw a press conference with 3 Republicans and a Democrat all talking about a proposal to come up with $300 million, I think,
right,
to help to backfill some federal funding that help to boost childcare salaries. That's going to be expiring at the as the pandemic is waning.
That's right, and the reason is clear. The North Carolina Chamber was there too, because this is now a problem for the bag. This is a problem for everybody trying to make money because they can't hire enough employees because the potential employees cannot get child care. So this is starting to mess with people's money, and so it's really important now.
That is usually when things come to a head, isn't it?
It helps.
It does help. Anyway, so really interesting response from Robinson.
Right.
Very tempered.
Yeah, I think I had said this is Mark Robinson reined in. He I assume, has decided that he would rather be the governor of North Carolina in 2 years than to sound like he's just, what, posting on Facebook. That's a better option to actually have a chance of being governor. Now, he also gave a CPAC, and the interesting thing about the State of the State response from him was he was saying the same things, espousing the same policies, but he was using different words. He wasn't calling anybody a name, for example.
And a whole different tone and a whole different, even the body language. And this is, we compared it. I did a story on Tuesday comparing it to a CPAC speech that he gave just 2 days before that on Saturday night. Completely just like two different worlds. Same suit, same outfit, completely different worlds. So I guess this is, the question is which of these we're going to see on the campaign trail. If we do see him on the campaign trail, which we have no reason to think that we won't.
Right. He's certainly clearly running for governor. I mean, he hasn't formally announced, but he
calls it the worst kept secret in the state.
Well, yeah, and I think that's probably a fair characterization. So, what does he spend the next 2 years doing? Does he keep giving these fiery church speeches where he's just condemning all sorts of ranges of people that he doesn't agree with? Or is it more like what we saw Monday? And I'm assuming it's going to be more what we saw on Monday because that's more electable, and he's already got the primary. He's got to worry about the general election. He's essentially, it seems like, got the primary sewn up. I'm sure there are a couple of Republicans who are thinking about running who don't want to hear me say that, but that's what the polling says.
It's early yet, though.
It is early. It is
very early. I will say there was one thing in the CPAC speech that caught my attention. And he talked about when you're doing what's right, when people are against you, even your own party turns against you.
Right.
And I was like, okay.
Well, and I mean, that's all politics, right? I mean, of course, you're not going to agree with every. Parties aren't a monolith.
No.
You're always going to have people jockeying for position within them. I mean,
No, but there's been a lot of talk, from people who are, in the Republican sort of circles, that there are concerns about whether or not Robinson can win
Right.
win a general election.
right.
And so, I just wonder what was behind that, I guess.
Yeah, I'm
comment.
sure there's a long story there. We shall see how that advances. I'll mention very quickly. He was supposed to have a press conference on Thursday of this week about DEI, diversity, is it
Equity and
equity and inclusion in
healthcare.
In healthcare, that got canceled. We don't know why. So I don't know if that is a message shift or just a timing thing. Could be either or something else.
Yeah. In the meantime, Medicaid is going to be on the Senate floor next week. One of many, many things that's going to be happening next week. Speaker Moore warned us on Wednesday after session that it was going to be a busy week next week, and I think he's right. But you noticed that somebody put out a press release reversing themselves.
Yeah, so Ben Moss, who's in the House and is running for Labor Commissioner.
His second term, maybe?
Yeah, I think he's in his second term, and he's really trying to boost his noticeability, I guess.
His profile.
His name recognition. He's putting out a lot of press releases with bills, and it's been pretty strategic about it. But it basically said, hey, I voted for the Medicaid bill when it was in the House. I'm going to vote against it when it comes back from the Senate because, I quote, I care about healthcare access in rural and underserved communities across the state. That's why I voted for it. But he's since found out that this proposal will have the opposite effect in rural areas in the long run. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody run for statewide office put out a press release to say, hey, I'm changing my vote because I misunderstood the most important policy decision of my career on a topic that has been debated for more than a decade. So good luck with that. I don't know who spoke to him and said, you need to change it. Obviously, constituents back home or something along those lines.
Well, there's a couple of folks who aren't super keen on this deal. One of them is, of course, the advanced practice nurses who got left out of this, right? They, initially they were in the House version. They got taken out of it when it came through. So the con reforms are still in the final version, but the SAVE Act is not. There's also AFP put out a press release opposing it.
Yeah, Americans for Prosperity and John Locke are the two biggest kind of organizations I know of that are opposed to the Medicaid deal. I don't think the nurses are opposed to the Medicaid deal. They're upset they're not on that
they're
train.
Upset they're not in it, yeah.
As they should be. I mean, they were left out with those changes to how advanced practice nurses are regulated in North Carolina.
Another big thing that happened this week, it was a big deal when it first came out, but it seems to have gotten smoothed over. You might remember Aaron Paret had filed a bill that would have basically really overhauled how Wake County elects its board of commissioners, and it would have made for 7 members of a board, and they each would be elected from a district, and it would be nonpartisan races, which seems to be basically an admission that Republicans have a branding problem in Wake County. But would also allow people to sort of flood the zone. You could end up with 20 candidates, right? And somebody can win with like 7% of the vote.
Right, because there's no threshold. You don't have to get 30%. You don't have to get 50%.
There's no primary.
Whoever gets the most wins. And the compromise that was struck and is now in Virginia, we used to call this peace in the valley. We got peace in the valley on this bill, is 9 members. 7 of them will be elected from the districts. The districts already exist. Like if you're a Wake County commissioner, you have to live in a certain district.
You have to live in a district, but you get elected countywide, but that will change.
That will change to where you're elected within the district. And then come 2026, we add 2 members to the county commission, and those will be at large. So they'll be elected countywide, and we'll go to 9 members, and everybody seems to be fine with it now.
And everybody.
And they stay partisan, excuse me.
They stay partisan, right. And that was the thing that I think the Wake County commissioners were most concerned about. But they got on board with this. They sent some folks over to say that we're on board with this, and so it went through with nary a peep.
Maybe we should say Aaron Paret is the only Republican
in the Wake County delegation.
From Wake County in the legislature, and all the members of the county commission are Democrats, all 7.
In the meantime, we're learning a little bit more about the budget. The spending targets came out this week, although it sounds to me like the House released them before the Senate was really ready necessarily to release them. But yeah, so they're looking at basically a 10.5% increase over 2 years, which is really, compared to what we've seen in the past, there's been a lot of, especially from the Senate side, there's been a lot of push for what they call a Tabor level, which is, your inflation plus your population growth. and having it capped at that. But this obviously goes well above that.
Well, although inflation, I haven't done the math.
You know what?
Inflation's
Maybe
been
it
pretty
doesn't.
high.
That's right. Maybe it doesn't.
And look, there are some well-recognized salary issues. Every state agency basically is saying we are struggling to recruit and keep people because we cannot afford to pay what they can get and good employees can get in the private sector. So, I mean, it's 6.5% in the first year to go to $29.7 billion, and then an additional increase in the second year of the budget of 3-something%. 3.75%, so we'll go up over that $30 billion mark. I assume this is just the state money and not obviously the federal money, but I'm most interested in the $1.8 billion sweetener that we get for expanding Medicaid. We get an extra $1.8 billion from the federal government. I assume this is not calculated in there because that's one-time money from the federal government. But we're riding high. Everybody, we got all this money coming in. We keep having surpluses. We had all that federal pandemic money that flowed through the budget the last couple of years. So it makes sense, but I think it's going to go fast. Once you start giving people raises, given the number of state employees, given the number of teachers, given the significant percentages you're going to have to do to make a dent there, this money is going to
go quick.
It's not going to last as long as you might think.
No, it's just yesterday. I think it was Wednesday. Steve Troxler gave a talk to the House Ag Committee, and asked again for more money for his department. We've heard a lot about other departments, haven't heard so much about ag, but he said he asked for $8 million last year, and they only gave him $1 million. He said it was just enough to piss everybody off.
Right.
It's like, yeah, exactly. It's like he says, I want my other 7. And I think a lot of departments and agencies are probably in exactly the same place.
Right. He told a story about how he gave pilots raises because he was struggling to keep, they fly the planes that fight fires and whatnot. The Forestry Service needs planes for a number of reasons. And he said the pilots got raises. He kind of fixed that problem. Then the mechanics got upset, walked 3 hangars down at the airport they were working out of, got mechanic jobs working on planes in the private sector for $30,000 more.
Yeah. The state's got to do something, or else they're going to have to. Well, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, we'll see. Budget-wise, timetable. Senator Phil Berger told us this week that the House is expected to send a budget over to the Senate in early April, and on that timetable, the Senate should be ready by mid-May at the latest.
Yeah, but then they got
release
a
its budget.
But yeah,
sure, but we're moving fast. This session is moving fast, and Legislative Services did work this week. I was looking at bills yesterday, Thursday. More than 60 bills cycled up on the website on a Thursday. I think the budget is going to keep moving fairly quickly. I think there's confidence that we've got the money that we need. And do we care now about people's schedules and people's summer? Like, are we going to try to have vacations and not be in session all year long? Am I setting myself up for disappointment, Laura?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are, Travis.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah, no. I mean, I do. This has been a trend over the last couple of years, though. I mean, I do give them credit for trying to recognize that this is a citizen legislature, and it is a part-time legislature. And they've lost some really good legislators on both sides of the aisle to the fact that you can't make a living. The only way you can take part in this body is if you're rich or retired, for the most part, because you can't make a living around the timetables that they've been working under for many years. But they're trying really hard in the House this year to have Tuesdays be just a work day, committee work day, and then floor votes Wednesday and, if needed, Thursday, to just sort of cut out the Mondays and maybe cut out Thursdays where they can, so that people can know the days that they really need to be here.
We mentioned that the governor in his speech, I think, called for double-digit raises for teachers. Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson is a member of the State Board of Education. I believe we mentioned on a previous show that they voted unanimously, so the lieutenant governor, a Republican, supported raises of at least 10%. That would kind of seem to make 10% raises for teachers like the starting point for negotiations, but kind of a not so fast this week from the Speaker of the House and
from Berger.
From Berger. They both basically said they're worried that large enough raises for teachers crowd out the raises they need to do at state agencies. And
state employees are already fuming because they feel like teachers have gotten a much better deal over the last few years than they have. They've gotten much bigger raises, and so that's going to be a tough balancing act for legislative leadership to figure out, I think.
Yeah, but they seem to be leaning kind of – I keep hearing from Berger and Moore that the state employees, particularly in targeted areas, like the speaker mentioned community colleges is having a real problem.
Right.
Particularly the people who train nurses, because we've got nursing shortage, so nursing salaries go up. So why would you teach nursing if you can go be a nurse? and make more money. So that seems to be the real focus, is just these state employee salaries.
In the meantime, in court action, we should mention the NC Supreme Court decided. Did we mention this last week, Leandro?
Yeah, well, I don't know about if we talked about Leandro. I'm thinking more about the rehearings next week on voter ID and redistricting. Although I don't want to talk about either one of them, I just want to note that that's happening next week.
Exactly. Well, but the Supreme Court also put a stop to the order to disperse money.
That's right,
for Leandro. And so it's not technically a rehearing, but it is at least bringing it back before the court. So that's 3 that have come up, which is basically more than reconsiderations have happened in the past 30 years. Is 2.
Right.
So that's a lot of going back. And I asked Senator Berger about that yesterday, and he said he feels that basically, that they feel like what the previous court did by speeding up cases, by taking cases, was politically motivated and was bad law. And so they feel like they are within their rights to go back and review it.
Yeah, because Democrats skipped some steps when they controlled the court ahead of November, because they knew they were going to lose control of the court to Republicans. And now that has happened, the Republican court is going back and doing these things.
So anyway, the Supreme Court is not going to let the AG or the governor file an amicus brief in the hearings that are coming up. We got the voter ID and redistricting, as you said, on this coming up this week as well. Is it Tuesday and Wednesday?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's the 14th and 15th, I believe. And then on the Leandro thing, just to circle back on that, the way that got going again was the state's new controller, who I guess writes the checks, filed at the court and said, hey, I'm still concerned that I'm about to do something illegal if I pay out all this Leandro money. Can you weigh in on that? And they said, no, don't. You shouldn't send that money. Now, the controller is new. It's Nels Roseland, I believe is the name, appointed by Governor Cooper recently. Now, that is a confirmable. I can't remember if it's a Senate confirmation or a House and Senate confirmation, but either way, Republicans have to sign off on it. That's my point. But I would love to know, what sort of conversations did the governor have with Mr. Roseland before he appointed him to this position? Because moving that Leandro money is that's got to be the biggest thing going in the controller's office, is whether or not you're doing that. Surely they talked about it, and then now the controller is saying, well, I don't feel comfortable doing this.
And that's the same thing the last controller said.
Right,
too.
Right.
But she filed for a writ of mandamus, which is like this kind of archaic thing that says it says basically make this stop, and he did the same thing.
Yeah, and I mean, but this guy was appointed months ago, so. Yeah, I don't know. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall for those conversations and the kind of the fallout of them.
We've got our first 2 veto showdowns possibly on the governor's desk. 2 bills that the governor vetoed in past sessions. 1 bill that would increase penalties for rioting, which we covered a lot this week. And then a bill that would basically make it easier for hotels to get rid of people who are living in them long term, at least up to a point.
Right, and that bill passed the House 83-29, so veto-proof majority, unless Democrats come home with the governor if he vetoes it. The riot bill had 6 Democrats voting for it in the House,
including a co-sponsor, Charlie Willingham, who was he was a former D.C. police officer, right? So I'm not sure what the governor's going to do about the riot bill.
Roy Cooper is in a difficult and fascinating place right now, because I can't remember who I heard saying this week, but sometimes when you get your first veto overridden, it opens the floodgates a little bit.
Oh yeah,
and more vetoes happen. So you want to guard against that. So do you let either of these bills become law without signing them, and just kind of acknowledge, just take the L and move on? But I mean,
there's only so much political capital out there to spend.
Right.
And I mean, the way the governor went after Kirk Devier and got him. For working with the Republicans, but we have enough. I think they're, again, back to the flood the zone analogy. I think we've got enough Democrats that are kind of working with the Republicans that they're thinking that the governor can't possibly come after all of them.
Right, and so I mean, we'll see. Or he may just say, "Damn the torpedoes," because I mean, at some point, if you think a bill it should not be law and you're governor, you veto it.
Yeah.
I mean, and the calculus doesn't have to be any more complicated than that, although there's always calculus in politics. But I think that's interesting. We may be about to see these first overturns, and it really may change the dynamic.
I just have a really hard time imagining. I could be wrong. I've been there before, but I have a really hard time imagining him trying to push people like Mary Wells Bodie, who voted for the anti-rioting bill. clearly because she's in a swing district. It's a very tight district that includes some Wake County. Is he going to make her come back home?
Well, now in the
uphold
Senate,
that?
it won't matter because
Right.
she could come back home and
Right.
just have a vote against her in
But
an ad, I
let's
guess.
go
But
to Garland Pierce or Tricia Cotham or Michael Ray
Right.
or Shelley. Is he really going to make Shelley Willingham a sponsor? Try to vote against his, to let him veto his own bill. I mean,
we'll see.
that's a tough one.
No.
Anyway, also this week, fascinating. This topic always fascinates me.
You always want to talk about it.
I do. I love it. I'm so fascinated by this. So this Convention of States, this is the Article 5 convention question. And you've probably heard about this. What's fascinating to me is that it started back in the 70s, right, with a balanced budget amendment. Oh, thanks, Travis. But it has sort of ping-ponged around the fringes of both parties, right? Like Democrats were talking about wanting a Article 5 convention to get rid of Citizens United. And then Republicans have been talking about it in terms of term limits, balanced budget amendments, and limiting the federal overreach, however you want to read that.
Right.
Right. But suddenly it's become mainstream. And I'm curious as to how that happened. I talked to Bob Phillips over at Common Cause, and he thinks it just has to do with some of the really kind of toxic partisanship, the divisiveness that's going on right now, that everybody's like, clearly our system isn't working, so we need to rewrite it.
Well, and it's also been a very long time since we passed a constitutional amendment, right? So people look, and I don't know what the date was, but I mean, the Congress can work to amend the Constitution as well. You don't really see that happening. People look at Congress and they say, all right, it's kind of dysfunctional. Let's do it ourselves. So I can understand that. Both those bills, did they pass the House this week? Okay. So the Convention of States bill and the term limits bill, both of which would attempt to amend the United States Constitution, passed the House. Senator Berger in the Senate says they could not reach consensus last year on these bills, and so they didn't go anywhere in the Senate. They have not discussed it this year, but they will. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I'd kind of be surprised if the Senate voted to go with this, but...
Well, it was interesting when you look at who voted against the bills. It was fascinating because you had a few folks on the far right and a bunch of folks on the left who are voting against it, saying that they have concerns about the idea of a runaway convention. You get people in, and Senator Berger alluded to that yesterday, talking about it, concerns that, it depends on who the delegates are. You could end up with people with left-leaning ideas that might put something into the Constitution. No, of
perish
course,
the thought.
That's not how it would work, of course, because the states still have to ratify what they do. So it's not like they can just rewrite the Constitution wholesale. But you know what? Some scholars, including former U.S. Chief Justice Warren Burger, said that's not necessarily so. It's not clear what they can and can't do once they get into the building. So, don't know. Interesting.
All right. Yeah. So there's some downside, is what you're telling me.
Well, I don't know. I guess it depends on how you read it. All kinds of fun bills got filed recently, including one of my favorites, Jason Sain's perennial keep us in daylight savings time.
Yeah, so we're springing forward this weekend.
Right, we're in standard right now, so we're springing forward this weekend into daylight time.
Into daylight savings time. I don't know which is which.
So we keep us on summertime.
Okay.
Year round. I got to tell you, I get more emails about this than I do probably any other story.
Yeah, I guarantee you that's a bill that it would get your name in the newspapers.
Every time.
Yeah.
Every time. We do a story on it. Every time I get emails about it. Every time.
I'll run through a few others. Senator Corbin and John Bell in the House have both filed a bill to require 4-year degrees for fewer state jobs. That's going to be in committee Tuesday, I assume, based on the names and based on the fact there's a bill in each chamber, that's probably a goer, particularly given what we've talked about, the difficulty recruiting.
And the names.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Jim Perry, again, has filed a bill to ban lobbyists from the Board of Governors. Quite a few members of the Board of Governors are now or have been lobbyists who lobby the General Assembly. The General Assembly appoints the Board of Governors.
Seems like a little conflict of interest. I don't know. What do I know?
Yeah, Perry filed that last session, too. I don't think it went anywhere. Don't expect it to this year, but mentioning it anyway. Michael Garrett and Gladys Robinson in Guilford County, a bill to undo one of Senator Trudy Wade's legacy bills. For folks who remember her, she pushed for years and finally got a bill that allows local governments in Guilford County to advertise stuff on their websites as opposed to in the local newspaper, which, is a big revenue hit for the local newspaper. Garrett and Robinson want to reverse that. They're Democrats. I doubt that passes.
Yep, and then there's $100 million for school nurses coming from Gail Adcock and Cynthia Ball, Senate and House. It's hard to say where that money comes from, but it is true that North Carolina's nurse-to-student ratio is laughably below the national standard for that. I mean, and they say that this is something that could help not just with health in schools, but also with mental health. A lot of times the nurses are the ones who are the ones who notice that something's going on with a kid, maybe calling social services, helping to connect that kid with community services and that family, and we don't have the nurse or the social worker, then you don't have that connection being made.
And that's right. And I think you'll probably see some school nurse money in the budget on top of what we have. I don't know about $100 million because the $100 million is on top of what we already do in this state. And I talked earlier about how fast money goes, just some back of the envelope math. Let's figure $80,000 for salary and benefits for a school nurse. I'm pulling that number out of the air.
Yeah, I don't think it's that high, but okay.
But so I'm trying to be conservative. That's 1,250 nurses. There are more than 2,500 schools in North Carolina. And then you also have the question of, well, do we have 1,250 nurses we can put in schools? Because we just talked about a nursing shortage, and we just talked about a difficulty building the pipeline of nurses because of what we can't pay community college instructors to train nurses. So it's all
tangled up.
Yeah, this is what people mean when they say you can't just throw money at problems. But although I would note, as Kurt Vonnegut once said, why throw money at problems? That's what it's for.
And then we should mention Woodard and Murdoch have a bill in there to upgrade the water plant that serves RTP.
Yeah, $25 million. I am looking for more information on that. Would love to know. I was of the understanding that RTP had lots of very rich corporations in it. I don't know why the taxpayers need to spend $25 million to upgrade their water plant, but perhaps that is why they're in RTP, one of the reasons. So I look forward to more information on that one. Also, a bill that would streamline reviews for apartments. This is a bill that's been that's been at the legislature before. Steve Jarvis in the Senate has it, where I believe the way this works is you can hire your own engineer if your local engineering department is not Johnny on the spot enough to move plans forward. That's H332 and S275. That bill is back. It's been controversial in the past, but we're almost certainly going to see the legislature do something to speed up the building permitting process in municipalities and counties. I've heard that over and over again from developers and from lawmakers that there are changes that are needed because we have a housing crunch.
Yeah.
To build more housing faster.
Yeah. Well, we have a housing crunch and we have a lot of underfunded local governments that don't have the staffing available to keep up with a normal demand, and we're not at normal demand right now.
Right. Next week, like you said, busy one. Medicaid going to pass the Senate.
Very busy. And also we're expecting to see the governor's budget come out. Normally we would expect to see that the same week as the governor's state of the state, but this week was ACC, so what do you want?
I had not made that connection.
Oh, come on. He was there. He was busy, right? No, he was at, the governor was at Alligator River Bridge yesterday with USDOT officials talking about federal funding. So it was a busy week for the governor as well. Also, we're going to be seeing the CRT bill coming back up. This is Torbett's bill.
This is the one that limits how we can talk about race in the classroom, essentially, at K through 12 schools.
That's in committee on Tuesday, I think. You noted a bail bond reform bill.
Yeah, there's a bail bond reform bill in committee Wednesday. It's an agency bill. I haven't read the bill, but you see the words bail bond, and two other words ought to pop up in your head: complicated and controversial.
Right.
So that I don't know how much ink it'll get, but that one is always. Something's always going on in that world.
Of course, there is the Supreme Court rulings as well. Hearings.
Yep. And that's about all I've got.
It's a gracious plenty.
Yeah, it sure is. Almost 30 minutes.
All right. Well, we will.
30 minutes, 30 billion. We got a budget cap ourselves.
Anyway, thank you for joining us, and we will fill you in, of course, next week here on The Wrap.